Oh, okay. So you work with Todd? No. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
I feel like I'm
Love being the sidekick.
All the fun none of the responsibility.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll give maybe some responsibility.
Oh, yes.
So Katie,
That's why her face looks so familiar.
you have that here. You have special edition. You're right. So you're right. It does do special. You know, it's just pretty sure. Two are fine.
I have to drive back tonight.
I think it evolved throughout the day.
Well, there's one area, bakers, so Jewel, interchange, that's where it was a little baby. It survived. And I don't know how long it survived. It did get off the side of the road the next day high, so. Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to drive back to
Oh, I saw it in my window today.
I know, big ones.
Yes.
Can everybody hear me if I don't stop and speak in front of a microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Gail Hendrickson. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County. A little bit about me. I moved to Clatsop in 2015, but have only been working with the county since January of 2018. So new to state planning here in Oregon, new to Clatsop County in many ways. So I'm looking to you all as locals to help guide us all through this process and participate in it. Having said that, I just want to go around the room and everybody introduce yourselves. If you brought a dish, tell us what you brought. So if we want the recipe, we can find you after the meeting. So I brought the bean salad.
I'm Cheryl Johnson. I'm the Citizen Advisory member from Northeast Clatsop County, and then each of the regionals send one representative to the county-wide one, and I'm also the rep from Northeast to the county-wide one.
And I'm Ted Messing. I'm Cheryl Johnson's husband. I'm a 45-year resident of Roundsmead, Oregon, and we're a small woodlot owner. We've got one of the most beautiful pieces of ground overlooking in Brownsmead. I've worked as a logger, woodworker, fisherman, construction, truck driver, you just about name it, I've done it all. And we've done selective logging on our place, and I'm happy to be here and hear all the issues, so thank you.
I'm Roger Dorbrand, and I'm an Astoria resident for about 10 years, and I've been active in forest issues, writing articles and so forth for about the last 5 years. Looking forward to it.
Bruce Francis, I'm on the Clatsop County Planning Commission, and I went past the Domino's on the way
Is it longer?
The mics are on. Kelly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kelly Huckestein. I'm on the Citizen Advisory Committee for the Northeast.
Austin Tomlinson, I work for Columbia Land Trust. I'm also on the city of Clatsop County. Also on the planning commission for the city of Dearborn.
Mike Baldwin, I've worked here or in the timber industry for about 34 years and just thought I'd come see what this process is.
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Stark and I'm an extension forester for Clatsop County with Oregon State University, just based in my office right down the road. And I'm happy to be here, new to Oregon and new to this county for going on 5 months.
Good evening, I'm Ashley LaCora. I'm a stewardship forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry for the Astoria District.
Hi, my name is Beth Fitch. I am employed by Hampton Lumber. I'm a forester and silviculture and reforestation forester for them. 30-plus year resident of Clatsop County, small woodland owner, mom, volunteer.
I'm Lydia Mendoza, I work for the Columbia Land Trust, and I live here in Astoria.
I'm Katie Volke. I work with North Coast Land Conservancy as the executive director. My background's in ecology, so I'm here to represent conservation and represent ourselves as a forest landowner in the county.
My name is Margaret Minnick. I'm on the Southwest Coastal Comprehensive Plan, is it a Community Advisory Committee? Citizens Advisory Committee? I can't remember what it stands for, but I am on that. But I live here in Astoria. I work for Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, which is down by Oswald West State Park.
I'm Robert Strickland. I live on Clatsop Plains, and I'm not a local. I've just been here for 70-something years.
You're close.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Mark Morgans. I've been a forester here on the private timberlands in Clatsop County for the last 20 years. I work for Greenwood Resources.
Hi, Jenny Johnson, Astoria resident. Spent 16 years working in forestry, and just interested in this agenda tonight. Really interested in the topics and what everyone has to say.
Chad Arnold, I'm the stewardship coordinator for Hampton Family Forest, which is the forest management division of Hampton Lumber.
Kristen Rasmussen, I'm also with Hampton Lumber. We own and manage about 30,000 acres of forest lands here in the county, mostly within the Napa area. And of course, we have the sawmill over in Warrenton.
I'm Andy Davis. I'm the chair of the Citizen Advisory Countywide Committee. I live in Astoria. I have one tree, it's an apple tree. Not going to be timbered anytime soon. My background is data analysis for behavioral health. I've been here about 5 years.
Mary Kennis, a seaside native, but lived everywhere from Guam to New York City. So been out of the area for a little bit, but back. I own property in Seaside, and I am part of the Clatsop Plains Advisory Committee.
I'm Maria Pinsetich. I am Mary's cousin, and we have property, family property. Our family's been here over 100 years in Clatsop County. And I am also on the Citizens Advisory Council for Clatsop Plains.
I'm Lisa Kerr. I live in Cannon Beach. I'm here representing, or on behalf of ORCA, Oregon Coast Alliance, and I made Madeline's.
My name is Ralph Bloomers. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Crag Law Center. We work with conservation groups and local residents throughout Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. I also am a forest land owner, but some distance from here on the White Salmon River. And yeah.
My name is Anu. I work with Ralph at Craig Law Center. I'm an attorney and the Coastal Law Project legal fellow, and work with residents like Cheryl on coastal issues that are important to the community here. And I'm from Portland, but I love hanging out on the coast.
My name's Bob Van Dyke, and I work for Wild Salmon Center. I live in Forest Grove, and I mainly want to say thank you to all of you who brought the delicious food tonight, because I brought nothing, and it was delicious to eat, so thank you.
I'm Paul Clements. I work for the State Forester of Oregon from the Salem office, and I'm really interested in what people think.
Victoria Sage, I'm a planner for Clatsop County. I'm originally from here, so I just moved back a few years ago.
I'm Pam Birmingham. I'm on the Citizen Advisory Committee for the LC Jewel area. Small lot owner out there. Been here 31 years. Have a degree in forestry, but selling real estate?
Todd Lundy, architect retired. Had land here and down in Cannon Beach, or not Cannon Beach, but Arch Cape since '74. And what else? Oh, brought the deviled eggs. Oh, and I'm on the committee for Southwest County and also the representative for the county-wide. Those aren't important.
Pamela Matson McDonald, I'm a journalist. I'm here to put in my comments. Thank you.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. I'm Clatsop County Commissioner, District 4. I'm also the forest rep for the county's representative on the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee. And I have lived in Oregon since 2004 and out on the coast since 2007. And I brought the, I'd like to say it was mine, but I got the carrot ginger soup from the news orchard. And I also want to thank everybody for all the delicious food. It's been a feast. Thank you.
I'm Jim Allegria. I'm the countywide, part of the countywide advisory committee, and I brought salmon.
Thank you. My name's Carolyn Eady, 30-year resident of the county, the first 20 in Jewel, which is the center of logging for this county. Learned a lot out there. 10 years I've been in Astoria. Involved in a lot of groups, a lot of time with the indivisible North Coast Oregon. But my whole sort of passion the last 5 or 6 years has been the interjunction of forestry and climate change. And I could go on, but I won't right now.
Charles Dice, I'm on the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee, Falcon Cove Beach Water District, and a couple of the other water councils around the Northwest.
I'm Joanne Hernandez. I've been here since 1936 in the state of Oregon, and I like clean water. I'm not on any committees anymore.
Do you believe in citizen involvement?
I sure as hell do. I was on that committee for the state.
That's a lot of
Lucy Wong, full-time resident of Falmouth Code. We appreciate having the beauty of our wonderful coast. My husband and I support our forests, our coast, the environment, and sustainable use of our resources.
May I say one more? I just want to, maybe someone said this before, but I just want to thank everybody for being in the room. I know that this is going to be a long process, this comprehensive update, but if we get as many voices as we can involved, we're going to end up with a better product at the end. And I just appreciate everybody being here and listening to each other. And I especially appreciate Gail's leadership on this. You've been doing a fantastic job, so thank you.
Indeed.
We also work with wonderful staff. Besides Tori, we have Julia Decker, who's an assistant, who's been really working hard on this. So. Okay, moving on, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you haven't signed in yet, if you could please do so. If you want to be notified of future meetings, please provide me with a way to contact you. Otherwise, if you would just sign your name, because we are keeping a count of how many residents and people stakeholders that we can get involved in the process. So that would be helpful before you leave. Another item we talked, restrooms are straight back, men's are on the right, ladies are on the left. We do have a water fountain back there, and there are pitchers of water and coffee here. The other thing is that some of the people who are here tonight have sent me some support documents and information. Since not everybody's had a chance to do that yet, what I would like to do is if you can get me anything you would like to share with everybody by Friday, this Friday, at 5 p.m. on Monday, which is the holiday weekend, then I'll put it all together and send it out to everybody so that everybody gets the same information at the same time. So, just so that everybody knows that. I am very happy to see so many different people here who I haven't met before. But the county is in the process of updating its comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan we originally adopted back in 1979. So it's 40 years old, and it's past its expiration date, and it needs to be updated. When we first adopted it, there was no internet. There were not personal computers, there were not really cell phones. So it's a very dated plan, and things have changed over 40 years. So the comprehensive plan has 18 goals. They're dictated to us statewide. Everybody throughout the state follows the same planning goals. If you are lucky enough or unlucky enough to be in the Willamette Valley, you win and you get goal 19 as well. So you get an extra goal. You actually get goal 15. So we're looking goal by goal through each of these parts of the comprehensive plan. The goals cover a wide range of topics. They range from goal 1, which is citizen involvement, goal 4, which is a lot of what we're looking at right now is forest lands. Goal 3 is agriculture lands. We look at shorelands, beaches and dunes. We look at economic development. We look at watershed protection. We look at recreational lands. So it covers a gamut of things. And they're individually numbered, but they're all interrelated. And that's one of the important things I want everybody to keep in mind as we start to talk about goal 4 and forest lands. How does that intertwine into the other goals? How does it intertwine into recreational lands? How does it intertwine into economic development? How does it intertwine into watershed protection and open space and wildlife habitat? So there are things that we need to keep in mind. When we started the process, you heard tonight from several different committee members. So we divided the county 40 years ago into 6 planning areas. We've got committees for each of the planning areas, plus the countywide committee, which consists of 5 appointed members and then a liaison from each of the planning areas. So we started this process back in February. It's a 33-month process. That's the second thing I want everybody to keep in your head. This is not the end of our discussion tonight. This is the beginning of a very, very long, hopefully beautiful friendship. But this is the beginning. And Robert's my best audience. So keep that in mind. We've got 32 committee members right now. Many of them are here this evening.
Shall we give them a hand of...
So right now, as I said, we're working our way one by one through the goals in order. So we've worked up through goal 1, goal 2, whatever, the second one, goal 3. Now we're on goal 4. And goal 4 has generated a lot of discussion, a lot of interest, some concerns. And so a month ago at the Northeast meeting, the committee members there decided that they wanted to meet with some of the folks who showed up for public input and meet with them before their December meeting. And so as we went through the other committees, we started hearing some of the same requests that we would like to meet with more people or have more information before we meet again in December. So that is how all of you got pulled in here. And when we look at goal 4, thing number 3, I want you to keep in mind, and there's going to be a quiz. So, goal number 4, forest lands, is the one that captures everybody's attention, but so much of it is already prescribed under state law under Forest Practices Act. So that's the third thing you need to keep in mind. And that's why Ashley is here tonight. And Paul, I don't know why Paul's here. But
It's a cool building.
But, yeah, so they're here more or less to keep us on the straight and narrow, because there are things, because of the Forest Practices Act, that we have to work within the confines of, and that's just...
I was going to say, one thing that Paul did for all of us is at the last public meeting on this issue, he handed out to everybody in the room a copy of the Forest Practices Act. If I understand that correctly, right, Paul? Yes. And so that's a valuable resource considering but that what we're talking about intersects with that, so.
Okay. Let's see where I left off here. So the issue going back is a forest land is big, not only because it, can be emotionally charged, but because 85% of our county is designated as forest lands. And that's a huge chunk of the county. So it is a very big topic. Some of those lands are state-owned, some of them are owned by the county, a lot of them are privately owned. And we have representatives here tonight as well, who represent the private side. What we want to remember again, and I've been pardoned, but I had a lot of thoughts I wanted to make sure I got it out before we started your discussion. Basically, what we're looking at tonight, I'm going to tell you what tonight is not. Okay? Tonight is not a debate. We're not here to pick a winner, a loser, a right side, a wrong side. We're here to start a discussion. Tonight is not a discussion about how and or whether to rewrite the Forest Practices Act. So if you are here to discuss how we rewrite the Forest Practices Act, you can't do that. Okay? The Forest Practices Act is state law. So I just want to be very clear about that. I also want to be clear that even though you'll see a set of questions that have been given out to all the citizen advisory committee members that are on your agenda tonight, these are not meant to do anything more than to just start a discussion. So this is not staff trying to push a preordained outcome. It's based on feedback that we hear at public meetings, over the counter, in discussions with people as we go throughout our work lives. And then the final thing I wanted to say about what we are not tonight is we will not be going goal by policy right now through every policy in Goal 4. So why have I gathered you here other than to eat food and look at me? So we're here, hopefully, again, to begin a conversation that lasts more than one evening. We've got a 33-month process ahead of it. We're about 9 months into it. So we've got a good 2 to 2.5 years to really talk about this. And it's not just, again, in context with Goal 4, but it's going to be in context with so many of the other goals that we're looking at: economic development, recreational lands, open space, watershed protection. All of those things tie together. And when you impact one, you impact the other. And so that's what we want to do tonight, is to have the opportunity to start to listen, to ask questions, and to start getting the information that I'm hearing the committee members feel that they're lacking, that they're not getting that direct input. And then at the end of this all, let's see here. People have asked me, what's the goal? What do you want out of it? The only goal I have is really to start the discussion. Think about, as we go through this, do we want to create maybe a separate committee that works just on this particular issue? And if we do, what do we want that committee to look like? I don't need an answer on this tonight, but start thinking about it. Other than that, I just, again, thank everybody for being here. Thank you for the food. I'm sure that you will all be very civil and polite and just open to listening and hearing. So, right now I'm going to pause. Any questions so far?
Is this meeting being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Good, good.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, can I just ask you, especially for guests that haven't been part of the citizen advisory committees, to describe the process by which input in the various committees feeds up to the plan, and what the ultimate decisions about what goes into the plan, where those decisions happen, so that citizens who are interested in getting their thoughts about forest practices in Clatsop County included in Goal 4 for our county, how would they most effectively get those thoughts into our plan?
Okay, so the way the public input portion has been structured is everybody is invited to every meeting. Everything is public, everything's on the record. So you can choose to go to a planning area committee that's in your local area. We have one out in Napa, we have one in Orange Cape, we have one out in Warrenton at the Pacific Range, we meet at the Jewel School, and we meet at the fairgrounds for the Lewis and Clark committee. The countywide committee meets here. We have a web page, and it did not show up here, but we have a Facebook page, a web page, all the minutes, all the agendas are on there. So the first step is to show up at a meeting, or to contact staff, or to contact one of your representatives. So if you know Cheryl, or if you know Maria, or you know Mary, show up and talk to them. Tell them what's on your mind, because they're here to represent you. They are the Citizen Advisory Committee, and they are the representatives from your planning area. So you can talk to them, come to a meeting. Everybody participates freely at the meeting. None of the committees, even though it's on the agenda, have a separate time. Usually it's just everybody discussing in a group. The committee members, the public, commissioners, if they show up, when they can show up. So that's that. So when the committees for the planning areas will make recommendations, they will filter up to the countywide committee. The countywide committee then will look at them, make a recommendation to the planning commission, and the planning commission then will look at them and make a recommendation to the board of commissioners. So along this long process, we had kicked off with open houses this summer in all the planning areas. We are going through the committee meetings right now. We're going to do another round of open houses come springtime, starting probably in April, May, and start bringing some of the initial draft recommendations forward. Once we get public input from that, it goes back to those subcommittees in the planning areas, and the process starts again until we get filtered up to the Board of Commissioners. This is why it's almost a 3-year process. So, did I answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think you did a really good job explaining what the process is. And could you explain a little bit more about what the process is? I'm just trying to understand how, if we're not supposed to talk about forest practices, if that's not part of the county planning process, what is it that you guys do have purview over? And my understanding of the comprehensive planning process with Goal 4 specifically was, originally it was to find ways to incentivize to keep forest land from being converted to other uses. Is that the original kind of focus of the goal, and is that still relevant to this discussion?
Yeah, so that is still the statewide planning goal, and it also balances out with it's the economic, the recreational, and the natural wildlife habitat resource-based concept is all part of statewide planning goal 5. So while what we cannot do, as I understand it, yes, sir.
Goal 4.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, cool. Is we cannot adopt regulations that are more strict, and actually, you correct me if I say this wrong, but we cannot adopt regulations that are more restrictive than what is allowed under the Forest Practices Act. Now, having said that, okay, yes, so that kind of segues into what I would like to lead off with tonight. If you look at this, I think the first thing that we need to think about is what are the challenges we're facing in our 20-year planning window, and that's where we need to start our discussion. So what are the challenges we're seeing coming up, and particularly as it relates to forest lands? So I'm sure that there are many things that people would look at. There are challenges and there are opportunities. So we need to start by identifying that first. And then from there, we can look at it and say, okay, and I'm going to use the example of climate change. And I know that there may be people in here who may not see that as a challenge, but if you did see it as a challenge, for example, what can we do maybe in some other areas of our goals to encourage policies, not to require them if they're in conflict with the Forest Practices Act, but to encourage policies that might help mitigate some of the impacts from climate change. If you see a challenge over the next 20 years of a decrease in timber industry jobs, so then that ties into goal 9. So then we need to start thinking over the next couple of years, how do we address those challenges? Do we put in policies that encourage, I don't know what, looking at other types of cross-laminated timber or something like that? Does that make sense? Okay. So, any other questions? Okay, so I guess then what I'm going to do is, if we're going to help me out, is just throw the question out there. You know, a lot of you are very heavily involved with forest lands in one way or the other. What are you seeing as challenges that we're going to be facing here in the county over the next 20 years?
The obvious simple one is what goes on immediately adjacent to forest lands. Like, I'm sure Mark can think of all of the natural clashes with almost any activity that is not forest land if it abuts forest land. And it just, I'm not going to list all the things, but whether it's dumping or having fires or just things not getting along together. With having a forest with 90-foot tall trees next to whatever, whether it's a wind throw, there's just, I don't have a good idea of what goes along that quarter-mile strip, but to me it's a problem issue, whether it's homeless camping in the forest. There's just a world of clashes that I've seen, people camping living probably in his forest and leaving a dreadful mess, and it's a social problem. I don't have solutions, but I think there's a huge amount of what happens next to forest to protect the forest and protect everything else that goes with it.
Livestock wandering into the forest, in pastures.
So how does that impact the forest?
You get tangled on trees.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we summarize correctly. So it's livestock wandering onto
Forest lands from pastures that are right next to them.
Yeah. I was thinking, when they replant, they seem to replant all the same trees. And in the natural forest, there's all different kinds of trees, totally different biodiversity. And I think that's a problem. Acres, hundreds, thousands of acres of the same trees.
And so, Ashley, can I ask a question of you? When somebody clears or cuts the harvester timber, are they required to replant a certain type or mix of species?
They're required to, we strongly encourage the native trees that are growing, and so the top 5 in this county would be Sitka spruce, western hemlock, Douglas fir, red alder, western red cedar, the top 5, I would say. And so I always talk to a landowner about pulling 2 or 3 from, or a mix of up to all 5, and you get naturals come in. So rarely do we have a pure stand of just one species.
And I can confirm that. Again, Greenwood has managed about 140,000 acres in Clatsop County. I think many of you are aware of that. And thanks again for about a third of the room here actually went on our forest tour last Thursday. So thanks for that. We were able to cover a lot of these questions then. But I think that same question went up, and we showed you on that tour a number of areas that have been reforested. And what we're doing is we're planting back, trying to plant back the same species at a similar proportion what existed there naturally. And so we can go back and look at that. And as we know, on the western side of the county here, that's heavy to Sitka spruce and hemlock trees. And then also we know that there's some natural seeding in of red alders. And then when we're coming back and thinning those stands out at around age 15, we're trying to make sure that we're maintaining, perhaps even enhancing that diversity by leaving some of those red alders that are actually growing back in there too. Now, it is true, as you move further east in the county, you get into that area where Douglas fir has been the native tree to evolve there naturally. So you'll find foresters are planting Douglas fir in those stands there, basically, again, back to the proportion of what it evolved there naturally.
Are cedars more flavorful? I noticed that
Cedars are more flavorful. We talked about that a little bit. We do plant some cedars in. For a little more diversity, we consider those sacrifice trees, because we know the elk like them, but we'll put those along some draws and places like that. And then we get some higher elevation, and we actually plant some true firs, noble firs, silver firs, because they've evolved naturally at some of those higher areas, perhaps at the ridges around Onion Peak, places like that, Elk Mountain.
I can confirm we have the same practices. Beth just whispered that we plant 5 different species as well, depending on the location.
Because, yeah, you have a very.
Oh, I do. Sorry, no, I just confirmed that Hampton has the same practice. We plant 5 different species, all native, depending on the location.
Andy, then Todd.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a point of sort of clarity from Ashley and Gail, because I think this might be a good example. Because the Forest Practices Act has specified language around this issue, like the mix of trees going in, what is the county's ability to speak on that?
So I think you can encourage, suggest, is my understanding of what your document
But as a county, we don't have the ability to say, you need to plant a 20-20-20 split of the 5 top species. We can't do that, require that.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to set that as groundwork for people to understand what our role here is. We can advise and encourage. There are certain processes the county controls, but a lot of things are going to be prescripted by the Forest Practices Act, so we've got pretty strong limitations on what we can do too.
But if you want to do something additional, like say, gee, we want to give you a brownie point for maples, this, that, or the other, in addition to what is required, I'm sure it's okay for us to provide, badges for doing things in addition to what is required.
Thank you.
Another big one, this is taxed on to Roberts for proximity, it's water quality and the impact of clear cutting and spray on water quality.
I wanted to make a comment about,
Louder.
I wanted to make a comment about species diversity. The U.S. Forest Service in several places in the country are now experimenting with trees that are not native to the particular place because they're looking at what the climate is going to be doing in 30 years from now. So I think this has to be a consideration. We're operating under a plan that's 40 years old and the Oregon Forest Practices Act that's almost as old with very little change. And I think that the major change that has taken place, the undeniable factor, is the climate change. And so it will impact things like what kind of species will survive. A fellow that I know has a sustainable, or actually it's a selective logging acreage, Peter Hayes, and he said that this year they had a number of their largest fir trees died because of the heat. And that's right here in the Coast Range. So things are changing rapidly, I think.
Yeah, so I just wanted to also chime in on the watershed issue. Certainly, the drought years, the successive drought years we've seen in Oregon and also out here on the West Coast have impacted the amount of water that we have. And I think that the knowledge that we have about the quality of the water in the watershed, especially as it relates to what's happening with the forestry practices, including things like spraying, our knowledge is changing a whole lot faster than the Forest Practices Act is changing. And that's a problem and a challenge, perhaps.
I'd like to know what Bob Van Dyke thinks of some of these projected changes to the Forest Practices Act that would relate to climate change. Are there some that you have specifically would call attention to?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer to that. But I will say that it seems to me the first question to think about up front is what goal you want for the county. And, you know, what I'm hearing in part in these questions is, one is that they want species diversity. People want a diverse set of species in the forest, and that gets to the planting question. I'm also hearing that people want protections for water quality and confidence in protections for water quality that's coming off of forest land. So I guess that's how I think about these things. In terms of the suite of values that I think you're going to be missing, or the challenge to face sort of on the forest side, is really whether a wide range of historic species are going to be extinct in the county or not. And that's because many of the species that evolved here historically were in very old forests. So yeah, they were in forests where the diverse mix of species, but they were in forests with enormous trees and large down wood and standing dead trees, and a whole diverse range of species that simply occur scarcely or not at all in many of the forests that are managed for timber production primarily. So, if the Clatsop County wants to have that species diversity in the future to give to the next generation, then that needs to be articulated as a goal, and then you can walk back from that and say, well, you know, how would you get to that kind of thing? From my view, the only place that's likely to have success on that is on the large state-owned acreage. Obviously, there are smaller private acreages, some like work the land trust is doing to buy places and put them in conservancies. Some of the state parks are pretty small and along the coast, so you'll get some of the habitat there, but not in big patches. So really, for my organization, the state forest would be the place where you would see that, where you'd want to set that as a goal to have that develop for future generations. Doesn't feel likely to me on any of the large private ownerships that there would be. I know I'm talking a lot, but I'll just say lastly, regarding climate change, I mean, obviously you would want to think, looking ahead, how might the forest be stressed? And are there species to plant that would help stresses that are coming from climate change? And then in terms of reducing or mitigating climate change, certainly the longer you leave forests standing by and large, the more those trees are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and storing that carbon. So forests are carbon sinks by and large, and one can think about management. The Forest Practice Act doesn't have anything to do with climate change now, or that's not a consideration of any sort, which isn't a surprise. I mean, it was passed before that was really a concern.
Can any of the state folks that are here talk about whether or not there are any initiatives going on at the state level to open up or review or look at Forest Practices Act with regard to climate change? If you're aware of anything.
I think so. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not part of the state forest program, so I can't speak to what they're doing on their lands or the discussions of the future for them.
Paul, you have any input?
Here's some input, okay? Ashley is your local representative, and I really want you to know her and trust her to help you get what you want. That said, there is a report on carbon in the forest that's available on the agency website. I think that represents the work of people that are looking at a broad scale of all state-owned resources. And we do have a board of forestry now, and we have a new member, and the first words out of his mouth were that you need to consider climate change in everything that you do. And so I think the discussion isn't going to be limited to this room here, and you're going to be hearing it all up and down the road. So I can't. And the forest, and if I may, the Forest Practices Act is likely to not be the place where that discussion is going to take place so much. The Forest Practices Act comes from a variety of different places. But yes, sir, if you're asking me.
Yeah, well, so I'm asking process questions a lot here. So if people are concerned about Forest Practices Act as separate from what's going on in our goal 4, how does the evolution of the Forest Practices Act happen? How do citizens influence that process?
Let's come back on another day and talk. You want? I don't want to hijack this guy.
I mean, I just want the 2-minute. Who makes those decisions?
I can answer that. Yeah, I can tell you too.
We have someone from the Craig Law Center.
All right, that would be great.
Yeah. So one thing just on the climate piece, and I sent this to Gail, is there's the Oregon Global Warming Commission, which had members from all different industries in it, and they produced a report at the end of 2018, really at the beginning of 2019.
And that did actually go to all the
Yeah.
committee members.
And so top scientists from Oregon State University, forest landowners, everybody participated in that. And I think it's just reading the executive summary, the first 8 to 10 pages is really all you need to read. You don't need to read the entire thing. So I would look at that on the climate piece. Forest practices. So yes, goal 4, right? Your process can't dictate or change the forest practices, but definitely you all as a group can speak to the state as to what you want to see. That doesn't mean you'll change the forest practices, but you can fully speak to it. You could also speak to the federal government and say you would like to see money for carbon storage projects. Or, the tribes, for example, the Warm Springs right now is doing carbon storage projects using the California rules. And Bobby Bruno, the tribal leader over there in the Natural Resources Department, they're doing carbon storage on their land. So you all as a group could advocate for money coming from somewhere to do carbon storage projects. That's something you could do as part of your plan, even though the forest practices has a minimum floor. You could go above the minimum floor. Now, to change the Oregon forest practices, that would be rules adopted by the Board of Forestry. That would be getting the state legislature to act. It's been 25 years. There's been no changes. That could be the citizen initiative process. So that's how you can change state law. Of course, that wouldn't be Clatsop County changing the state law. That would be the state as a whole changing state law. Now, you can't it's pretty much preempted for Clatsop County to adopt changes to the Oregon Forest Practices Act. There's rules that were adopted that say if a county wants to do something different than Oregon forest practices, that's preempted by state law. So again, that is a prohibition on changes at the county level for the most part. For example, Lincoln County adopted a spray ban, right? You all know about that. Some of you all know about that. Lincoln County, by citizen initiative, the citizens adopted an aerial spray ban, and that was just chucked out in the courts as being preempted by state law. So there's a specific example from another county. Yeah.
I'm standing because I love public speaking. I'm going to shorten up into that. Two points. And the second one, the first one I'm going to say, give you a second. There have been changes in the Forest Practices Act and rules and how things are done and enforced and reasons why. And it's a really big subject. The second point is the woman who brought up, I want to apologize, you brought up diversity, and I'm going to say diversity in species, and several of us said, oh, no, we do this, we do this, we do this. Then at least 2 people spoke about water quality. Who doesn't want quality water? And spraying was in each of those comments. So coming back to the county level and the citizens who live here, back to bringing it back to challenges in the 20-year window as related to forest land, I think a challenge is for citizens to understand the science, believe in the science, and always ask questions. But from my standpoint, my career and my family, where we recreate and, aerial spraying, none of us commented on it. We commented on the species diversity question, but, we didn't address spraying. We operate under some beliefs in science that has been provided to us over the last 30 years for our application for controlling some weeds for the first year or 2 of establishment of conifer seedlings. So back to my roundabout way, challenge is for us to find pure science, applicable science that is going to work for us.
So, just for my own elucidation, what would constitute pure science that would be satisfactory? What means that part?
Pure science, probably.
Peer review.
There's repeatable data or findings. We have tested the water in the proximity of some of our projects. So, let's see. Paired watershed analysis is an example that actually reminded me of
Peer-reviewed? Peer-reviewed? Peer-reviewed by other scientists?
Not tobacco scientists.
Peer-reviewed by peers. Other scientists review it. That's fundamental for best available science.
Information that makes people comfortable with the activities. And if somebody came up with information that said to me, hey, you're poisoning your well by doing this thing that you thought was okay, and here's the proof, where, I think it's maybe a bigger question that I can't answer, but it's peer-reviewed.
I just want to make a quick comment on that. So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We all have to the extent we can get a common body of science that we all feel like, okay, we agree about this, and that shows us how the world works, and based on that, we know what kind of rules we need to make. But unfortunately, I think even if you have that, there's an underlying, well, one, there's a lot of uncertainty oftentimes. There's a lot of things we just don't know very well. And so then we're left with a question of, well, who should bear the burden? Should the landowner have to prove that the water upstream is making them, has chemicals in it? Or should the landowner have to prove that the water doesn't have the chemicals in it? So, even if you can establish some scientific facts, sometimes there's the question of cost and burden of proof, right? Who should actually be able to show something safe before we do it or not? And I don't have the answer to that. I just mean to say that question is out there too. Yeah.
Hold on, there's a gentleman over, wasn't there somebody in the back?
Yeah, that'd be you, yes.
Yeah, this is changing up a little bit. I wanted to go back to the climate science piece because that's something that is of concern. And I represent Oregon State here. I'm the local extension forester, and I just wanted to share with the group that this is something that Oregon State takes very seriously. And I work for the Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Service. We meet every year. We're planning climate change information right now. We're developing curriculum around it. We have a bunch of people putting their heads together to try to understand forest carbon management. And the goal is to come out into your communities and to talk about this. So this is something that I want you to consider, this group, Oregon State Extension, for a resource for this. We're learning about this stuff, how to manage, how to deal with forestry practices and climate change, and how they can be beneficial, what the impacts are. So stay tuned for that information that's coming quick. And I just want to put in a word of caution about mixing species up, and that's something that we're addressing too. And so we want to be sure that we don't bring in pest problems with new species. And just putting in a plug here for the group to consider is staying with species that are native here, and there are ways and methods that we can do to work with those indigenous endemic plants and species by working with plants at the edge of their range, for example, that exist in more extreme parts of the county places, and using those existing species. And that's a pest management perspective I'm sharing there. Lots of resources on that too.
Just want to dovetail on the climate change topic. It's one of the biggest, it's an enormous challenge, and we need scalable solutions. So I hope that when we talk about forests in the county, and there's lots of talk about keeping the trees in the ground to sequester carbon, there's another side of that, and that's the wood products that are produced locally and sequestering carbon in that way. So I think I would like to see, Clatsop County look at ways they could promote and encourage the use of Clatsop forest products in the development of CLT and making a more sustainable and green-built environment in our urban and rural areas.
And that definitely ties in with our goal as well. All right, we're going to go Pamela, Jim.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul Newman in the Oceanside Water District is working with Stimson to do spraying quality things. They are taking all kinds of things that they want to know about how long the pesticides last and how long they are being sprayed and how they affect the people and the trees and the infrastructure and the insects and wildlife in those forests. They are doing extensive studies. His name is Dr. Paul Newman, and he is doing this study with Stimson.
This relates to the challenge question now.
About the watershed and pesticide spraying.
So
So.
They are.
Is the study the challenge though?
No, the study is about how pesticides are impacting their watershed and their forest lands, the people there, and also other things that are happening there.
Yeah.
And it is a scientific study with data that's being going to be assembled, and it is going to be scientifically correct. And you can draw on that for anything you need.
So we're not here to evaluate the study, we're here to
I'm just,
identify.
yeah, I'm just giving information,
concern-
I'm giving information about what's happening.
Your challenge concern is spraying
Yeah.
the watershed, okay.
Gail, that study was released this week. I'll be happy to send you the link.
Okay.
My question relates to challenges, and it's a couple steps away from the conversation we've had so far, and that is with climate change and other reasons, we're going to get an ever-increasing population in Oregon. I work in hospitality. I talk to people from all over the country every day, and I would bet that if we had just the parents that come to visit their children that moved to Portland, you could probably fill the Rose Arena. So as the population increases all over the state of Oregon, all over the Northwest, because we have cooler temperatures, because we have water, that's going to put pressure on how our land is used. Oregon has very special land use laws, and that's why in the past other states have come to study us, and that's why I can drive 2 hours from our area to the Portland area, and in between I see beautiful farms and beautiful forests. In other metro areas, you don't have that. So one of the questions and one of the challenges that we have is how do we manage this 85% of our county being forest land? Are we going to have to foresee giving up some of that land? I don't know. Where are we going to be putting the people that come here? Just on the coast, our population in the summertime will triple. What happens if they stay? Where are we going to put them? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying we know that we're getting more people here in Oregon.
I'm going to go Jess, Caroline, Courtney.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment about carbon sinks and forestry here. One of the areas that we haven't spoken about and is less controversial is planting street trees. I mean, urban forests, urban trees is something that's becoming quite a movement nationwide and even internationally. And so this is sort of one of those low-hanging fruit type of thing that I think we can all rally around and do something good and provide shade and cooling for structures that are nearby. So, I mean, there's a lot of wins in there. So that's something that I'd like to see us push in the policy. And I don't know exactly to what extent, but that's just something that we can talk about.
I'd like to say City of Seaside has been in Tree City USA for over 20 years. And that's where it certainly could be. And it's not that hard. And if any of the incorporated cities are interested, then contact me or Dan and we can make it happen.
And the state has a good program on helping cities and municipalities deal with their urban forests.
Cannon Beach also.
Yeah.
Cannon Beach is true.
I think alluding to what you said, we are going to be seeing over the next 20 years what they call them climate immigrants, people who can no longer live where they have been because their islands or their coastlines are now covered with water. It's a social justice issue because the people that are impacted are quite often the poorest and who have nothing. There's over hundreds of millions of these people already. And I think they find this area desirable, and it may be for a while, but we're going to have our day where we're going to start losing homes along the coast. But my main point I wanted to draw attention to is the fact that the Oregon Board of Forestry is by law, by ORS, responsible for all forests, except federal, in Oregon. And we have not mentioned the private industrial forests in this county. And I personally believe that is where we're seeing the biggest negative impact on climate change by their practices. So I think that our Board of Forestry members now, through the help of the governor, is more balanced. And I think they're receptive to hearing about that. And we need to get people to be paying attention to what the Board of Forestry is doing and saying. And we've lost, just in Oregon alone, 1 million acres of what they call coverage. They have to be about 15-year-old trees seen from the air. And that has had a major impact.
So narrowing it back to the question though, what is your specific challenge that you want to identify?
Well, I want us to recognize that the Board of Forestry can take actions. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the legislature.
Does anybody from the state have a comment on that? Wouldn't the legislature have to make
They may have to, prove it.
If you would encumber private land more than it is now, you would have to find that a negative impact from the administration of the rules that exist is something you could demonstrate. And that's called a finding of degradation. And for people who would like to see the rules changed, that's a threshold that then begins other processes that often result in changes in the standards that develop. But to act on, I suspect there are people now who are thinking like you, who are wondering how they can quantify their concerns and demonstrate that the framework of statute and rule that we have now enable them to make those concerns reality. But for Clatsop County, and your planning goals and how citizens speak to them, it may be that you get there quicker through favorable taxation and zoning decisions and other things, perhaps. I don't know. Some counties have exercised. There are other land uses that you could, if you want to. But yes, the Board of Forestry could make changes, but only within a narrow framework of legislative constraints.
So Paul, are you saying that in order to change the Forest Practices Act, it's a pretty heavy burden of proof in order to show that it needs to be changed? Is that?
Mr. Van Dyke knows this.
Yes, very well. The Forest Practices Act is set up in a way that, from my view, favors very much industrial production of fiber and puts a pretty heavy burden on changes. And it gets back to that burden proof issue I was bringing up earlier. It was a very heavy burden for people to show degradation. That doesn't mean, those are the choices the legislature has made. So if you want a bigger change, then we'll take legislation, or we'll take a ballot initiative, something that circumvents the administrative process set up in statute.
And I think at present, we're looking at like 6 ballot initiatives in the next 22 months or something. So you may get a choice.
Okay, Courtney, I know you're leading.
Just in regards to concerns for the next 20 years.
Louder. We can't hear.
I'll be louder. Just in regards to the next 20 years and our concerns, with urban growth and with increased population, I think the concern that we need to address is, or look at, is how best can we protect farm and forestry, and I say farm also, but how best can we protect farm and forestry, and that urban divide right there where they butt up right to private lands. How best can we protect the farmers and the private landowners, because Laura's law supports and protects farmers to the right to farm, and also, private landowners for the right to practice forestry management. And so how best to, continue
as you're moving into that area and you're right next to this beautiful acreage, are you informed that you are right next to a private landowner's potential logging site? Are you informed? How best could we prepare people moving into our community and say, hey, you're moving in right next to this dairy. I'm sorry that it smells, but it's gonna smell. We're not going to remove the dairy. And that's the best way I could kind of describe the direction that I'm going with that. But how best to inform the residents moving in that you're moving into a working forest and to expect practices that apply to a working forest or a working farm.
There's an existing mechanism for conserving resource land called transfer development rights, and it's allowed under state laws and programs. The LCD had a pilot program that is well subscribed to, but that's something that the county could adopt as a reasonable, realistic goal, is to develop a TDR program to where forest and agricultural landowners can transfer development rights and increase density in and around the urban areas. And then you put a conservation easement over those lands which prevent them from being developed residential.
Let me go to Cheryl first.
I just wanted to echo the concerns that were listed about watersheds. And I think two people mentioned specifically watersheds as for drinkable water. And I would like to expand that and say that I think one of the challenges facing Clatsop County over the next 20 years is healthy watersheds for salmon. And we've talked about agriculture today, we've talked about forestry, but we also have a responsibility to the fishing people in our community and as a food source. And all of the waters that originate in forestry end up in the Columbia River and so affect the fish that are in the river and then also the whole life cycle. So I'm concerned about protecting watersheds for salmon.
So I just wanted to share a lot of the things that I've heard since I've been here. That's part of my job, is just listening. And one thing that I hear all the time is, this is a definite challenge, promoting jobs here in the county for people to stay and work here, particularly in the forestry sector. And this could be, pertinent to things, climate change impacts and that. But this industry and this forest sector needs workers, and so we have to work with people in this community, regardless of the job industry, working at jobs and working those jobs and exposing people to let them know like this is something that they could do here, not necessarily with a college degree, and that they could stay and make a living here in this county, and that's going to be a challenge into the future as well.
So I just wanted to comment on hearing some of the concerns and make sure the group knows that the majority of forest landowners are not opposed to change. I mean, we've been evolving with time, we want to evolve. I know one of the things we use a lot is kind of maintaining our social license to operate, and that's one of the reasons I'm engaged here today, why we've done the tours and why we want to hear these concerns. Also, as far as an evolution of forest practice regulations, we've got an excellent example right in our backyard. Just a few years ago, you might have heard about the salmon steelhead bull trout rules, and it was actually an improvement to the forest practice regulations when it was recognized that maybe there needed to be some additional riparian management protections, additional shade on some of these coastal streams that were used for anadromous fish. So many of the landowners cooperated on that. We had 4 of the research sites on our property here. We paid for those. We delayed operations, cooperated with the state to be able to collect that data. And that's back to the point of having good peer-reviewed information. The information came back and was saying, yeah, on the streams that, particularly if they've got an east-west orientation, that we need to leave more trees on the southern side of those streams to keep that stream temperature down. So there was a lot of measurements taken, and it was across the geographic region, and so that was where it took multiple years to get the science. The science came back, it was peer reviewed, it was saying, yes, we do need to actually make some changes to the forest practices to protect that valuable resource. And so that's just a recent example, and I would say that, should there be some of the other concerns about those species or water in general, is that we would need to just elevate those to the point that would get the attention for a proper amount of research, have that research be able to be repeatable, reviewed, and then incorporate that in. And that's where I see as a land manager, a way for these things to evolve over time. There's a good recent example from the past, and it doesn't mean that we don't expect it to change in the future as our knowledge increases and we improve in understanding, almost like Mr. Dice said over there. So I was just agreeing with that.
Yeah, so I think that Mark's brought up a great example, because I was kind of involved along with that too. It happened in my era. And I think the OSU extension here brought up a lot of great points, that he's working on climate change. Then I listened to the other side of the room and I'm saying, hey, we're not going to change this act very easily because the legislative process is so involved. But then I come back to this side of the room and I say, well, Mark's made a change. OSU extension is making points to change. And I think that the way I see it is that the Oregon Forestry Practices Act that came about 40 years ago was based on the science of the day.
That's right.
And it's now established and it's been here for 40 years. We've just been given an example where change has taken place. Personally, I feel that as more new science comes available, the legislative process will be easier to overcome because the public will demand it. And I think, as Mark has just said, the big companies that are doing the forestry production for making a living will adhere to it, because it's a lot easier than going through lawsuits, because it will come up. So I think that the process will naturally evolve to change the Oregon Forestry Practices Act as new information comes along. And I'd like to hope that I was right in thinking that. You know, I hope that the process will evolve on its own without having to go to court and go legislative.
Gail, back to your challenges, we haven't mentioned recreation, and as it presently stands, it seems that the gates that allow access to forest lands are often closed, and the access to the forest land is denied for recreation. I know there are some limitations, but those might be overcome and allow the population to use the forests more and enjoy them more.
I have a question for clarification. Are you talking about state lands, county lands, or privately owned lands?
Primarily county lands. That's where we have some control.
County lands being those managed by the Oregon Department of Forestry? Is those the lands you're referring to?
Primarily, if we have the control to change these gates and open these gates up.
There's very few gates on the class of state forest.
All right, then.
Most of the land, I would say probably more than, I don't have an exact number, but it's very high. There's very few gates on the class of state forest. And where there are gates is because we've had vandalism, over homelessness, camping, drug motorhomes filled with 5,000 needles, and that's no exaggeration. So there are certain areas that, because the public has not recreated responsibly, those areas have been closed off. But it's a very, very high percentage of the land is open year-round to the public.
That's good to hear. I do hear also that we, who are the average law-abiding citizen, are being punished by those who break the law, and that's no way to have it go.
And also, Todd, to follow up with that, I believe that there are some county-owned lands that the county actually owns that are in our park system that may not always have full accessibility. So you can note on there too that it's also county-owned land. Courtney, you were next, and then
I just wanted to follow up this gentleman in blue. He was extremely eloquent in how he addressed, and I didn't know what his name was.
That's Bruce.
That was very eloquent, but just to reiterate that farmers and foresters, they're stewards of the land. And evolvement of practices, you've seen in farming how practices have evolved from, the old style plow change and evolve. Just like forestry practices have changed and evolved over time as new science is presented. And to just reiterate that it's science that is presented that says that this practice is a better practice. And so the farmers, the foresters, they will follow the science. And so as the new research studies come out, they will follow the science because we all want clean water. We all want the best for our land. We want everything to be balanced and, beautiful, I guess, is a good way to describe it. But yes, we evolve as the years go by, as science is presented, we follow the science.
Carolyn, and you can hear.
I just want to introduce the issue of the urgency. I don't know if you've been reading the Daily Historian like I have. They've got 11,258 scientists from around the globe are saying in a new paper, the Earth is facing a climate emergency, they wrote, and scientists have a moral obligation to clearly warn humanity of any catastrophic effect. I see data that all these countries have pledged to cut deforestation. It's not working. They say each year the annual rate of tree cover loss has increased by 43%, an average between 2014, an area of forest the size of the state of Colorado disappears each year.
Are you talking nationally or specifically about Clatsop?
I am talking overall about the global climate catastrophe. I'm talking about the amount of coverage. It's not only losing it here, we're losing it everywhere. And we talk about it will evolve as the science moves, etc. But I guess the best estimate is we have about 11 years. After that, all we can do is wish the people who will be living at that time the best, but it will be a miserable existence.
Okay, so your challenge will be climate change.
Climate change, but with a sense of urgency.
Okay, I don't mean to counter you too much, but I think that's very much wishful thinking that large companies will follow the science. Large companies will do what makes the buck, the biggest bang for the buck. Let's take the issue of clear cutting. They could selective cut, but it is obviously much, much faster, produces more money to clear cut. And that's what they're going to do no matter what the science says. And I've surrounded out around me where I live, state forestry behind me, which is extensively clear cut over the years. And then they went back in and planted, first it was a monocrop of Douglas fir, which, because it's a monocrop, started getting Swiss needle cast. Oops, can't do that. So now they're trying to mix it, which that's good. I guess they are following the science in that respect. But I would also then like to add that, so it's kind of wishful thinking. So are we here to make suggestions for the CACs to follow? Is that what we're trying to do here?
Well, you're looking to give them input. So when we get done with challenges and we want to think about moving on to opportunities, and we've heard some ideas. So for example, your challenge, as I've just heard it, is what impacts from clear cutting.
Yes, it's time we get rid of clear cutting. So that's number one. Number two is to go along with Cheryl.
We're not here to make judgments or advocate.
To go along with Cheryl's thing, 85% of Clatsop County is a forest land, and that means it's a watershed dumping into the Columbia River. And the first thing you learn when you're working construction, when the plumbers come on the job, shit runs downhill. That's what you need to know to be a plumber. Everything that you do on that forest land ends up in the Columbia River. So when we spray, it ends up in the Columbia River. And there's plenty of science to show the longevity of these sprays. And I would like to suggest that we could do hand releasing, and it would put a lot of people to work.
What's that?
If you hired
What is
crews.
hand releasing?
Oh,
What is hand
you
releasing?
go out, rather than aerial spray to suppress the competing vegetation, you hire people to go out and cut it by hand. It's called hand release. But you see, it costs, they don't make as much money. So we're back to that thing again. So anyway, I would like to suggest that that's how we could put people to work. Hand releasing of forests.
You have a challenge and an opportunity. Commissioner Salmon, I'll come back to you just for a moment.
I don't know how this affects, how much all this affects zoning and changing the rules for zoning. The agriculture and the forest area has to go to change from being in that area. They have to go through the process of getting a zone change before they can do something else with their land. And maybe a solution to keep more farmland, to keep control of the forest land better, would be in tightening up the conditional uses that makes it so easy moving from agriculture to, how do you do it? You go from forest to agriculture and then housing. Maybe that needs to be tightened up, and it would help tighten up some of those rules. I don't know how you feel about that, 'cause I don't remember.
Yeah, so when you want to take your land out of forestry, there is a process that
Yes.
you have to go through to declare that you're not going to be planting, you're going to convert it to a residential use. Is that
And isn't
correct?
it the same thing with agriculture too?
I don't know specifically about agriculture.
Well, yeah, they're taxed, because they're all taxed at a different rate.
Yeah, this is, but we're talking right now about the forestry side. of it.
That's right, but.
So they still remain, depending, their zoning itself doesn't change. Their land use, things that are
Right.
colored on the map with different colors
Right,
doesn't change. So, but they have a process they'll go through with the state to declare that.
But the state, but I thought that was done at the county level, and like right here in this.
So when they
these
want to
rules,
take their land out of timber harvest,
it's the state.
yes. Can you
Want me to give an example real quick? Say
Yeah.
someone has 10 acres and they do a clear cut operation on the 10 acres and they tell me they're gonna build a house and maybe have a pony in the backyard. So forestry, there's a form, the landowner is requesting exemption from reforestation because the Forest Practices Act says if you reduce the stocking level below a certain point, they're having to be reducing it to the gone, then you would be required to report. So the landowner is saying, well, I want to do something else. I want to build a house and I want to have a pony in the backyard. So the landowner fills out a form requesting exemption from reforestation, and the state forestry reviews that, and we say, well, that's fine when you the land for we work with the landowner and say, if your house, your shop, your barn, and your pony area is gonna be 3 acres, then we want you to plant 7 acres. And if you say, well, I'm gonna board horses, I'm gonna do the whole, 10 acres cleared off, then we have to go to the county and get a sign off, making sure the planning department says, yes, you can have do these changes to it.
So once that happens, though, the county itself can then limit how that property is used, and it would be rural property, right? It would save losing all the trees, or it would save the problem that the agriculture people have of somebody moving in next door to, and pretty soon you've got a city right out there in the middle of the forest area, or in the middle of the farm. So I don't know how to quite put that on your board.
So I guess if I understand what you're saying, that your concern relates to uses permitted in certain types of zones.
Right. Or.
And I think, aren't you talking also about losing forest land?
No, I'm talking about losing forest land and losing agriculture land. We need the agriculture land feed all these people that are going to be living there.
In the 18th century, there was a mathematician who tried to prove the existence of God by means of mathematics named Thomas Bayes. What his equation speaks to is the veracity of science. We're dealing with an existential threat to the environment by clear-cutting and spraying our forest lands without regulatory control. Is that the highest and best use of the land? In the language of the Forest Practices Act, is the greatest permanent value, similar to a county's highest and best use of land. That's why we zone, places to be commercial, other places to be residential. That's the highest and best use of that land as determined by the democratic process. We are dealing with a government that is, and a process that simply discounts the cost of clear-cutting somebody's watershed, like Arch Cape, where they had to put in $1 million water treatment plant that is poisoning their water with chlorohalo. It's cancer-causing, consequences of having to put so much chlorine in it. Not to mention the fact that there is a part of the government or state agency or university that says clear-cutting leads to landslides, even though during the storm of 2007, 27 landslides took out the Tillamook Railroad, and it's never been rebuilt. And it arguably cannot be rebuilt with that much damage to the environment. The science needs to account for all of the costs of the forest practices that we do now. Otherwise, we might as well be tobacco scientists saying that tobacco doesn't cause cancer. Or maybe even saying that people with cancer are predisposed to smoke. And that's a complete inversion. Where do we go from there? Erratic driving causes drinking?
So I want to make sure that I heard and understood what you have said. I'm trying to summarize. So what I think I hear you saying is that there are costs associated with unintended consequences associated with clear cutting that have not been rolled into any type of cost analysis. All right, so hold on, let's take a slight break for a moment. So we're at 5:55 now. We're scheduled to go to 7. I would prefer not to go over 7. I'm sure everybody here doesn't want to go over 7. Is the consensus that you would like to take a break and maybe we can switch a little bit and talk about some of the opportunities? Do you want to keep talking about challenges? Do you want to get up and walk out and get fresh air? What's your pleasure?
Take a little break.
Is there a break?
Yeah, 5 minutes. 5-minute break.
Okay, thank you.
Problem with science is it's a
Like I can get 10
because I took my copy.
He even said, hey,
mentioned as like the building that is. Yeah, I mean, in some areas of the law is very clear, right? Like if I'm filing a case, in terms of plaintiffs, right, if I make a claim. That's a little different when it's someone who got sued. If I get large scale, or based off of like multiple prosecutions. I am not. It's not that interesting a story. I moved to Portland when I was 8. Lived in Portland my whole life. Went away for college to Eastern Washington. And that was fine because I came back to Portland. Anyone would even know.
We are in agreement.
Glad I did.
I had heard a couple of concerns during the break, challenges, related to clearing practices, which I think dealt with how you said you were concerned with challenges with the slash.
Disposal?
Pardon?
Slash disposal?
Okay, Sam, you had one more challenge you wanted to put up there.
Challenge that I see is the balance. I think we're into the right timber landowners to conduct their business and the right for farmers to farm. But we need to balance that, I think, with the landowners that abut these practices. And as somebody who lives next door to a 136-acre clear cut, my driveway is a mud flow every time it rains because the harvest changed the flow of the water. I need four-wheel drive now to get in and out. And my water system, my spring water system was destroyed. I've been for 2 years without running water. And yet with the Right to Farm and Forest Act as it is, that stopped the timber company from having any liability for the damage they did to my property. That's a
Okay,
challenge.
so your challenge would be that clear cutting is having an impact on you and that it's not, you don't believe that the Forest Practices Act is protecting that.
Well, there's an equal level of responsibility, yes, that the timber companies don't have any responsibility to have land exposure.
Okay, so a lack of accountability. Responsibility, okay. Lack of responsibility.
Just one more, Gail.
Okay, this is the last one.
Wildfire risk management, somehow managing our forests so that the spread of wildfires is not so great as we see in California. It'll come. We just have to be ready for it, unlike what they have in California.
So that we can end the evening on a really happy, positive note, let's talk about some of the opportunities that we see in the next 20 years. And I know some of them have been brought up. Will mentioned transfer of development rights as a possible opportunity to help protect forest land. Jim brought up planting street trees. So let's hear some of the positive ideas, and I want to start with one as well. Playing off of Jim's with street trees, you're not really going to see street trees in a rural area, but on rural residential property, say down in Arch Cave or Falcon Cove Beach, if you cut down a tree there, we don't have a requirement that you replant anything. So, I would put that as an opportunity from my perspective, and that's my perspective only, that, maybe having a requirement on non-forest lands to replant trees that you take down would be helpful. And now we'll go to Courtney and Brady.
Just education. We have 85% forest lands here, and I often wonder why our community college doesn't have a forestry program, or something along those lines, even an associate's degree in forestry management. I just wonder, we have this prime real estate here that's forestry, and it's a great resource for our children. Just educationally, I know a lot of you took a tour recently, and that's a fabulous educational opportunity the forestry and the resident, and to just offer more of an open communication in a neutral environment so that people could communicate, ask their questions, and hopefully alleviate their concerns, or to at least get acknowledgement that for their concerns.
Okay, it's going to be Brady, and then I'll go Maria and Charles.
So I think a big opportunity we have in Clatsop County here is to build the definition back into, beyond what Oregon State has defined a forest as, to build a new definition of what a forest is. So for example, you know, a forest as somebody would see it that's not in the industry, they would see meadows and tree, you know, it's not all about a bunch of trees that are merchantable species necessarily. It's a lot of different things going on with a lot of products, and one of our opportunities is to, you know, sort of like you can see a whole state looking at something from one perspective. And we can circle around and try to see the issue from all the perspectives, develop a lot more uses for forests that value the forest for the forest, not just for the trees, because a forest is a lot more than trees, and I think that's a great opportunity, and a 20-year plan should include a lot of that. Does that make sense?
How old are you? No, I'm serious, because it's a distinct, a different perspective from the usual 58-year-old.
Yeah.
All right, Maria, you were next, and Charles, and who are next? Katie.
Okay, thank you. So in my head, I keep going back to, you know, you want to incent the right behavior, and you want to make sure that people are, you know, going in the same line. And I truly appreciate all I've learned recently. And what I realize that there's constraints on some things that, even though your good intentions are important, a lot of what we're dealing with is business still. It's still a business. So one of the things I would like to, I see as an opportunity, and I'm not certain how it would be done, so I'm not suggesting I have an answer, but looking at how revenue and taxation intersect with what the goals are of this, of the forest, not the Forest Practices Act, but what's going to come out of our committees. Because one of the big things at the, when we were in the room that was super tight and it was awful and hot and crazy. One of the things that I took away from that was that everyone wanted to understand how the taxes worked, and it was awful. No disrespect to the gentleman who was talking, he did a fine job, but the reality of it is it's complicated and it has unintended consequences, a lot of them. So what I'm hoping is that perhaps we could look at how revenue generated / taxation / so it's kind of a really big picture that I'm painting here, and how it can incent the right behavior, perhaps less clear cutting. If there were incentives to more selectively cut, then it would take the burdens off of the timber management companies such that it works out in the wash, and then everyone wins. I don't know how that works, but that is my opportunity. Thank you.
Hold on. Do you have an answer to her?
No, I mean, I know she didn't want to talk about taxes, but this is good.
Well, I mean, yeah, we do. We have to talk about I mean, it's.
We would need to keep the timber deferral tax option and create a tax deferral for significant wetland areas as well.
Can you repeat that, please?
Keep the timber deferral tax option and create a tax deferral for significant wetland areas.
I just want to add to that, is soil. Forest, the soil of the forest is very important. And how do we have an opportunity to conserve that? And the bounty that it may bring to us in the future that we don't even know. It's part of the ecosystem.
Soil conservation. Okay, I was
Charles, then Katie.
Yeah, so I wanted to platform off of somebody threw that great word out, education, a minute ago. So to me, there's a big opportunity for Clatsop County, maybe the planning department as an example, to educate people that are moving into this area. And there are a lot of people moving into this area, especially for whatever reason down in my neck of the woods. And it seems like when they move in, wherever they come from, like New York or Arizona, they have whole different rules there. And when they land in our little world, they just assume that the rules are the same. And so they immediately go out, cut down every tree in sight so they can maximize their view. And, they scrape all the soil off so that they can, plant their lush green lawns. It would be really great and an opportunity if anybody that buys land gets a little packet from the county that says, here are the rules. And I know people can certainly come up here and ask for them, but they don't. They get their builder and their builder's going to take care of all that stuff. And, the builder wants to build a house. He doesn't necessarily want to, do a educational job with his client. So I just think there's an opportunity for better education of people, especially people moving into the area, on what the existing rules are.
And it also sounds like your opportunity would include better county communication with realtors.
I didn't say that for a really good reason, because I've already got enough bad press. I don't need more.
Well, we're talking about the opportunity to increase the flow of information.
Yes. I mean, what you said is true. Like you said, I
Katie?
Well, what I wanted to say might be sort of obvious or big picture at this point, but I still wanted to have it be said, which is that there's a real opportunity for Clatsop County to make a statement in their plan, which is like a visionary statement about how we value forests beyond its role in industry. And so the state has the regulation covered. We're not going to change that in the county comprehensive plan, but we can still reflect the values of our residents in the goals and value statements that we might have around forests. And so valuing the natural values that the forest supplies beyond just fiber, for wildlife habitat, clean air, clean water, scenic views, sanctuary while recreating, quality of life values that people move here for and stay here for, are values that are largely reaped from private forest land and maybe the beach and ocean. And so the county has a real challenge in a plan that reflects the values of residents when less than 20% of the county's land is public and the majority of it is zoned forestry and therefore feels like out of our control. And I just want to suggest that what we do have in our control are these county plans and are our vision statements and our goal statements around them, and that we shouldn't feel like the goal that we can't address those values that we see within the forest in these larger statements just because we can't change forest practices.
It's been shown by a couple studies that forestry, as it's practiced in Oregon, is the largest contributor of greenhouse gases. So we have an opportunity to impact that. If we can some way, and I think it was like in the list of goals and so on, we have an opportunity to have an impact if our county grapples with that and makes a statement that we take that seriously, and we will try to, as this says, the policies, this is encourage policies to update the Forest Practice Act is one of the, I think it's the fourth or fifth bullet here. And if we update that Forest Practice Act, we could have a major impact in that area.
Continue to work. Okay, and the woman in the back, you may have to stand up and speak loudly or come to a microphone, because I don't think everybody will hear you back there.
I'm Nancy. I would just like to say the comprehensive plan is the tool for localities to be used as a visionary tool. So I support Katie's statement. I think that is a major focus of the comprehensive
Sharing an opportunity, we can disagree a lot about, things going forward, but one thing that we all have in common, what I'm hearing, is our love of forests. And so there's a lot that we can do in that commonality, regardless of where you come from and your stand. And there are opportunities for citizen science engagement and for scientific monitoring of things, and this is networking. I mean, this is something that Oregon does really well. Someone new to the state, you all are connected and you work together. You might not think that's same working here, but as someone who comes in and is looking in, you all work together on things that you don't see in California or that I didn't see. And so continuing those partnerships and those bonds that we all have, and keeping in mind that we all love forests, and that's our common goal. And we can work towards that together. And the opportunity, I just want to emphasize again to say, citizen science is a great opportunity to get involved in some of these issues.
So I just want to offer an opportunity to look at how the comprehensive plan can incentivize employee training in forestry, because it's changed so much. It's not just out in the woods. There's a lot of computers in there. And so to stay up to date with current practices, I'd like to see an incentive program to train these new workers.
We are getting a lot of marker reviews over here, so. Quite frankly, Commissioner Salmon.
I just want to talk a little bit about collaboration. This year, Greenwood Resources worked with the North Coast Trail Alliance, if I have the name right, and they have mountain bike trails on Greenwood Resources, your land, that's next to Carlucci Park, which, thanks to Mark and his work with that local group, that increases the recreational possibilities in Clatsop County. Katie's group is working with down in Arch Cape with the Watershed District to help improve the water district down there. I think the county hopefully will have a part in that also. But in what ways, if we look at this as an opportunity, in what ways can all the different people in this room that represent different areas of this room work together in a more collaborative way to once we establish what our goals are, which I think everybody's goal is to continue to have clean water and to protect our watersheds, how can we work together on that? I would like to see, I know we're a little competitive with Tillamook, at least in my mind we are, and Tillamook has a lot more recreational areas and opportunities than we do. I would like to see us, and I don't know how, but I mean, if we're talking about a goal, I think the more we can get families out into the forest, the better. I know the Department of Fish and Wildlife would like to see the continuation of families bringing their kids fishing and to maintain our fishing stock. And so the more we can get people involved in the outdoors, I think the better chance we are of protecting our great resources. And so I think an opportunity is to collaboration across the different groups that already live here.
Roger, then you, and then who else?
I have
just a comment and then also a couple of questions. My comment is in regard to your elegant statement of trying to establish a balanced forest management as a goal for the county. I just wanted to say that there's already two precedents for that. One was the Clatsic Vision 2030 plan that was done by the commission, hired an independent firm to poll the opinions of the people in the county, and overwhelmingly it was that they didn't want to see an increase in timber harvest, not that they wanted to do away with the industry, not at all, but that they wanted the other values, recreation, clean water, so forth, to be emphasized. And so that's balanced forest management. And then that was also reaffirmed by the county commission when they took the vote on the Lynn County lawsuit, and reaffirmed the fact that ever since its inception, or say, since it was introduced by the Board of Forestry in 1998, our county has always been on the side of balanced forest management. And that was the reason why they took the vote not to participate in the Lynn County lawsuit, because that was seen as in the opposite direction. My questions are, my main question is this. When I read through the various things that the commission is involved with, I got the impression that you have some kind of say over the establishment, or at least approval over the establishment of conservation area zones. And I'm assuming that that's made by those zones or those areas are set aside by the State Forestry Department. And I was just wondering what that relationship is, if anybody could speak to that.
Are you talking about like land use zoning or conservation easements or?
Well, I can't remember which page of goals it was on, but it had to do with, it seemed as though that the Land Use Commission was in some capacity charged with overseeing or endorsing the creation of conservation areas. I can't remember the exact language, but I believe it's the conservation areas that are established by the Department of Forestry. You know, we have had a goal in the past of 30% conservation areas in our county, and that's been shrinking down due to heavy pressure from the timber industry in recent years. And then recently there was an expose article in the Oregonian that showed a conservation area that had been set aside here in Clatsop County that was, it was really pretty shabby. It was really very cut over second, third, maybe fourth growth trees. There was an old foundry on it and a bunch of junk laying there. Not at all the kind of conservation area you would expect to see.
So I think what you're referring to, Paul or Ashley might be able to help me, but I think this is tied to the management of the state forest lands. Is that?
That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking that's going, but I'm not.
I think that's correct, and it's the distribution of certain stand structures on state forest land.
So what you would see as an opportunity might be that there might be opportunity for better quality conservation areas in these state managed lands?
Well, just some sort of oversight on that process from whatever you can do from the county level, because we've had these aberrant situations where a really crummy piece of land was designated fairly recently as conservation area, and meanwhile, 77 acres of prime timber in a recreational zone, Norristown Heights, was being targeted for clear cutting. It seems like it should be the other way around. That should be a conservation area. This other area could be thinned and whatever.
So our opportunity would be to have county officials work with the state to encourage them to preserve higher quality conservation areas.
May I say something? The state has a public meeting December 4th in Salem on the forest management plan. And if you go on the Oregon Department of Forestry website, you'll be able to get information about that. I think you can also listen to it on the phone if you can't attend that. But they have been doing a number of lectures on forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan, and they will continue doing that. So if you keep an eye out for that, you can attend those meetings. That's a public meeting. All their meetings are public, but that one is particularly addressed to the public at large.
They also stream them live, just to add, you can watch it live. So you can go to the site, you can watch the whole meeting.
Thank you.
A lot of great comments tonight. Growing up on a farm, I would just say that I really appreciate the right to farm and forest and the unreasonable expectations that sometimes new neighbors have about what that entails and how hard that work is. And I definitely remember when my friends from the city came out to see the farm, how much they noticed the smell. And that was a problem for them, and I didn't notice it at all because it was all up in my nose all the time with 75 cows. 4 things that I think are opportunities. I mean, we heard it from Commissioner Sullivan, recreation. I just think the numbers are pretty outstanding. And I would look at the OIA data, the Outdoor Industry Association, as a good surrogate for the value to Oregon of the things that we all enjoy in the forest, green Oregon, the water, the mountains. $16.4 billion in consumer spending annually for outdoor rec. 172,000 direct jobs, 5.1 billion in wages and salaries. Those are the OIA numbers in the OIA report. Get that, and I think that could be a central piece that has a huge amount of value. Water. You have an opportunity to get ahead of the problem that they're experiencing in Corbett, they're experiencing in Salem, and they're experiencing in other parts of the state. There's a study from H.J. Andrews, Experimental Forest, Oregon State University, that says short rotation forestry, 40 years, 50 years rotation forestry reduces water supplies by 50% as compared to 80-year rotations. We can clean the water, we can spend a lot of money to clean the water, but we can't make more water. In Corbett, I've been talking to the water manager there, and their South Fork intake went dry. They have to put in $2 million just to put in a well. It's a problem that is going to get increased with climate change, and I just think that it's really important to get ahead of that public value that comes from all of our forest lands, whether they're privately owned or state-owned or publicly owned. That's 85%, around 85% of our municipal water supplies come from forests. So you have an opportunity to get ahead of that problem, to know, let's say, where are the forests that you're not getting your water from, and where are the forests that you are getting your water from. I think that would be an important mapping exercise. Carbon. We've heard a number of people express, what can we do, right? The world is doing what it's doing, and we're little here in Oregon, and we'd like to make our contribution. Well, we have the most carbon-dense forest in the world, second only to the eucalyptus forest of Australia, which decompose faster. Thanks to the experts at Oregon State University, Drs. Beverly Law, Mark Harmon, Hudeberg, they have identified a number of things that you can do. You could increase rotation length. You can protect carbon-dense riparian areas that are most resilient. In other words, the areas along rivers and streams, and protect your water at the same time. And you can make money doing it. So I'm very interested to find out what Hampton and what Greenwood is doing, what TIAA CREF is encouraging. If you all are have your retirement funds in TIAA CREF, you can encourage Greenwood to do carbon storage projects. You can make a lot of money doing carbon storage projects. So that's another opportunity. I would say the last one that I would think about is wildfire. It came up a lot, and land use is huge. I have been to pretty much every Oregon Wildfire Council meeting that the governor set up this year and tracked that very closely, and I think the most interesting and impactful recommendations are on land use. It's the number one thing you can do is harden your home to protect against fire, because we have a vast sea of trees. While it might seem common sense that we could thin a particular patch of forests, the odds that that particular patch of forest will burn is less than 1%. In other words, it's a shot in the dark, right? If you have this vast sea of forests, there's very little you can do to broadly affect fire behavior, but you can harden your home. You can make really smart choices about where we put more homes. And those land use recommendations are on the Oregon Governor's Wildfire Council, and I would recommend that as a resource and an opportunity to prepare for and live more with fire, which is a natural part of this landscape and has been for a long time.
Less than 30 seconds. The manufacture of cement as it goes into concrete, is a globally greater source of greenhouse gas pollution than all of aviation. And the opportunity is doing non-concrete construction with forest products on every scale, on every scale of construction. And it's legal in Oregon. It's new directions in Japan, new directions around the world. And this is an opportunity for forest products to impact greenhouse gases.
I wanted to just kind of bring up, I guess it's kind of an overlap between forest land and housing, goal 10. So a lot of people here have mentioned, as the urban areas grow, there's this rub against the forest, which is definitely true. Here in Clatsop County, just about all of our cities are bordered by water, and on the other side, forests. And as probably all of us have talked about and heard about is the housing shortage here. My side job is property management, and it's a real problem for people to find homes, no matter what income range you're at. And we can't build in water, or wetlands. So our only other options are to do something with forested areas. And so, I really hope that these two goals, 4 and 10, work together to figure out a way. We haven't had much luck locally being able to increase housing. And the housing we have here is very expensive. So I would just throw that out as an opportunity. It's good timing to really, maybe those two groups can kind of work together on that one issue to help the problem.
I just want to add one other possibility is that if there was an understanding that more people are going to move here, where are they going to go? One of the possibilities, which has been resisted so far, is to increase the density within the municipal areas. That's a real possibility, and I think it's something that perhaps we will come to, but they may need help to understand that if it doesn't happen in municipal areas, it's going to happen elsewhere, and what will they be giving up if they do that?
Yeah, I would just add on to that a lot of us mentioned growing up on a farm or growing up near woods or spending a lot of time in the forests, and if you take that away from people where they can't live out in those areas, their kids can't play in the woods. That's a whole different lifestyle than what many of us have. And so that's the flip side, and that's where, the balance comes, to find that balance.
I think if we do our homework, we can offer hope. A lot of people are either anxious or depressed by what even I brought some of these statistics up. But I purposefully look for ways or approaches in the Environmental Defense Fund. Their fall issue, if you haven't seen it, you should get it. It was the most encouraging and hopeful thing that I have read anywhere. It's about, I'd say 12 or 13 pages, and it's just packed with what's going on that's positive. And I think we need to look for examples like that, and maybe I can try to get that issue to you or some way that you can get it on the page or
So looking for other examples.
Yeah, and let people here know about that one.
So I'm going to take a few more questions. I had pointed to, yes, Kristen, sorry.
Sure, I just have a couple, I'll be quick. One is as far as opportunities go, someone had mentioned recreation and gates, and I think that's one area where forest landowners could be playing a bigger role is in terms of emergency preparedness, whether it's gate keys, working with the county to understand what kind of equipment we have at mills or in forest lands and how we can be brought to bear in the case of an emergency. I think that's one area that I know some people are working with the county, but I don't know if that's, if that could be implemented on a broader scale. I think that would be helpful. As far as carbon sinks, I think there could be an opportunity to look at particularly wetland restoration and the opportunities there. The county could also get involved in encouraging the use of wood products residuals. We just were talking about some of our residuals from our mill being used in agricultural research and implementation. I think that's an interesting area that Clatsop County could get more involved in. And lastly, just a comment about the visioning process. I think it's incredibly important, and we appreciate being here today. Making statements, through the county, does have significant social and economic implications and repercussions. And I think that it's really important, especially when you're talking about the forest land in the county, to understand that there are 1,300 households in this county that rely and work in the forests. So I would encourage, as an opportunity, the county to really dig deep and understand the systems that work here in the county, from forest land to transportation to mill infrastructure. Understand, what these jobs mean to the community. Tourism is wonderful, it's very important, but on average, they pay half of what the forest sector jobs pay. These are good family wage jobs, and they need to have a voice in the visioning process as well. So I would encourage you to continue to reach out to folks like us, as well as the small business owners, the truckers, the loggers, other mills, to really understand their views in this process.
I'm going to take 2 more comments, and then I'm going to start wrapping up. So I'm going to pick people we haven't heard from a lot. I'm going to pick Katie, and we'll do Jim and Mark, and then we'll call it.
Well, I want to emphasize that there's huge opportunity around water, and especially, I guess, in the context of this goal, because our water comes from the forest. To some extent, our water is made by the forest. In the summer, fog condensing on the forest creates a bunch of our precipitation when we're in summer drought. So it's hugely important, and it's something that in my world of conservation, we've been able to really come together with our forest partners about, that we all really value water and water protection. So I think as the county, that water as an overlying, most critical resource for its residents, and also a product that all of us value greatly, is something that we can really come together around, and that there would be huge opportunity to look at water and forests and forestry, and that could be layered with some of the other sort of most hugely important values that come up for our community, which is things like affordable housing, as being one of the greatest things that our citizens want our leaders to address. And that we have to really look at the landscape that way. So as the county is looking at planning and urban growth boundaries and such, looking at water as the place where we don't put our development, as we consider where we do necessarily put our development, would be a critical way to look at those issues together. Recreation, likewise, those are areas where we can really come together with our forest partners, collaborate with the county and the conservation groups. We all value recreation outside. We all live here because we love the outdoors, regardless of how we might differ when it comes down to, land use laws. There is this underlying value that many of us share. So some of those things can be the way that we can really come together, I think, have incredibly productive conversations around larger land use planning, if we sort of drill down to some of those as being the most important things for us to address in the next 20 years.
Well, I'd just like to add to the list that we should keep our working forest working. And I would profess is that they're working in a variety of different things, as far as providing the jobs that they do, the tax base. And if any of you were at the Cedar Awards, we were really proud this year of getting the Economic Impact Award. And I shared during those comments that last year, the payments that we've made to vendors in this county was $37 million. And so that's a lot of working capital that goes back into families here that can then compound into, other things that they purchase in the county and move forward with too. So I'd say keep working for us, working. And I'd also say that they're working environmentally, in our opinion. We take great pride in the clean water that's coming off of our property and the amount that the work that all the workers are doing out there, taking care of the soil, the trees, getting them planted back, and then nurturing those stands, keeping them healthy so that they do. Foresters for a whole generation looked at that as growth and yield, which just became more sexy to say carbon sequestration now. But you want us to manage our stands intensively, get trees back, manage them intensively, which can include weed control so that they're growing to produce mills, raw material in the future, and sequestering that carbon. I'm glad that water was brought up. That is something that, like I said, not only do we take a lot of pride in producing, but we're concerned about too, because we do a lot to protect it, and that we're seeing that potentially there could be less yields in the future because of climate change or whatever else there might be. And that's something that I believe the county could be involved with also when we're talking about, what's going to be the allowable expansion of water use in the county, whichever that might be. And I know that's controversial, but several times tonight we've talked about more people coming in and more development, and more tourists, and more, and they're all going to use water. And to somehow do an accurate assessment of how much water is going to be available, build that into how much growth potential we truly have. The last thing I have is collaborations. We love collaborating with people. Those of you that were on the tour saw that last Thursday. I think Will has offered those again. We want to be able to do more of that. So let's look at those opportunities. We definitely did it to the group that planning, the volunteers that are on the planning committees now. I believe that I saw tonight less questions from that group that was out Thursday than I saw from just the population as a whole. So hopefully those 4 hours invested in time you had foresters from Hamptons, ourselves from the state, and the extension forester, it helped dispel some of the myths that I heard tonight. So we'll offer more tours on there too, and anything that we can do with that collaboration, getting the best available science, and keeping our working forest working, because they are doing exactly that.
And one more ad for the state. The governor has a tour of the 100-year water vision, and they've already had several sets of meetings. They're going to have more. It's all around the state. Check it out online if you want to contribute to how they see water and what you think is important. I think that's another thing you should keep track of.
One of the things that I've been having an issue with the entire process is we have these 18 or technically 19 goals, but we look at them, we have a tendency to look at them discretely. And in reality, the landscape isn't discrete. I mean, it's a continuous landscape. So what I would like to see in the plan is a series of overlays, like there'll be a biodiversity overlay, in order to identify these less common and rare types of ecosystems. Like to see an overlay of watersheds as well. Not necessarily as to an acquisition target, but as a method of trying to promote management within these different zones to accomplish maybe different objectives. Like, for instance, watershed, not suggesting that they could be acquired by the communities. That would be just a financial transaction, but maybe working with the landowner to say, well, maybe you need to increase the rotation age or have a few less roads in or something like that. If we don't have a common goal, then we can't rally around it. We'll never be able to achieve anything. Instead of trying to look at things piecemeal, look at things across the landscape. And if we can agree to something like that, then I think we will have so many people, so many different groups get together and join together for a common goal.
All right, so thank you everyone for your comments. I just want to wrap up very briefly. What I want to do is I want you to think about a few things from tonight's meeting. I want you to think about whether or not this was helpful to you, either participating, listening, being here. Was it helpful to you? Is that something that you would want to continue? If it is something that you want to continue this type of discussion as we move forward, who would you recommend be part of some sort of subcommittee or steering committee? So I'll send out a little survey following up on this after the meeting. Also, if you do have any information, brochures, literature that you want me to post as part of this, the discussion tonight, if you can get it to me within the next week or so, and I'll make sure that when I collect everything, I put it all up on the county's website and just disseminate. Yes?
Can you explain where on the county website they'll find this information?
It's everywhere. If you go to co.classic.or.us, there is a series of scrolling pictures on the homepage. If you wait for the one that says comprehensive plan update, that's the easiest way to get it out. So, and from there, you can go to the different plans. Click on that.
Okay.
It'll take you like that to our comp plan update page, which has sublinks then to all the citizen advisory committees, the videos, the audio minutes, the agendas, pretty much everything that we put out, background information, everything that we put out is available to the public.
You can attack it from Suffolk County Department of
Or you can go to the
Planning,
county's
yeah.
webpage,
But
but it's
there's
easier.
no one, you have to be imaginative.
Let's give Gail a round of applause.
One other thing. I told you there was a quiz. There were 3 things you had to remember. The only thing that has wrong. How long is this process?
33 months. Incredibly memorable.
So I wanted to make one point before everyone leaves here. So Bruce, who unfortunately has stepped out, or I don't see him right now, made some eloquent points about the progression of all of this, how it just sort of evolves as we get more science, better science, whatever, more understanding. And he said it was sort of a natural progression. And I just want to make the point that I don't think it's a natural progression. I think it's a progression that's spurred by citizen involvement. And all of you being here tonight is terribly important for this process, to keep that science at the forefront, to keep reminding people that this is important and that we want to see change when it's necessary. So please keep coming to these meetings, keep letting us hear your voices so that we can move this forward in a good way.
Remember,